December 23rd school committee meeting to order, and join me with a pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and attending this meeting tonight. We called this meeting because we just thought that it would be too long between now. Our next meeting isn't until January 13th, and we wanted to recap the events of this week, the security issue that we had at the high school. And I just want to caution everybody that everything that we're discussing tonight that relates to security, we want to be careful because anything that relates to security, we don't necessarily want to be discussing publicly with security concerns for security reasons. So we just wanted to bring everybody together to have the police chief and the principal here to just recap the events. It was a very stressful situation. I got a call from Brian, just to kind of bring you guys up to speed. I got a call from Brian at 8:15 that there was an incident going on at the high school, and then I called each of you. And we didn't know what exactly was going on. Brian was actually running into the building at that time, and we all reached each other, which is very unusual because normally you would just have Brian text us, but this was a different situation, and he asked me to call all of you, and you all answered, and I apologize to Chris. By the time I got to Zach, I just said, can you just call Chris Muncie? And I just kind of made my way down the line. I think it was handled, a very unfortunate situation. I think it was handled very well. I have not gotten a single inquiry or complaint. Of course, there are going to be things that we need to look at. I think that security issues, I think the high school does very well with security. And I was able to talk to one teacher who's probably taught here somewhere between 20 and 25 years, and we just kind of recapped what went on in the building. And I couldn't have gotten a better response from a teacher as to how it was handled, and what seemed to be calmness within the building with what was happening outside of the building wasn't known inside the building. And I think that there was this sense of, I mean, I was standing in front of a high school, and I honestly thought I was watching a movie unfold. It was, there were like 40 police cars surrounding the high school, and I just want to applaud the high school students, the staff, the administration, the police department, the surrounding law enforcement departments for everything that they did for Hudson. News travels so quickly, and by 8:45, I had a text from the chair of the Clinton School Committee asking me what was going on at Hudson, and which I appreciated very much. And that just goes to show how quickly news travels. And there was a lot of information out there, information that we didn't have access to, people posting, police, emergency response posting, which I wasn't seeing in real time. I can say that my only communication with Brian was his call to me. And then as I started to call you, because I live in front of the high school, I could hear all the police cars, and it was the sirens. And what stands out in my mind the most is the sound of the engines of the police cars, one after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next. How fast they were going, and it was frightening to listen to. And I just, from what I know, what happened inside this building was handled very well. And what we might need to do as a school committee is listen to suggestions from the administration, additional things that we might need to do, which is going to require funding. And that's where our level of involvement comes in, is to approve funding for certain things that we might want to increase the security in the building. And we don't necessarily want to talk about the specific things in public, but we would rely on the administration and the police department to give us suggestions for things that might need to be funded. So with that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent and the police chief and the principal.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I just, first I want to thank Dr. Kopecki and Chief Percy for being here tonight, especially Lauren. It's our first day of vacation. And also mention Sarah McCula, who's in HUD-TV, helping us, and Alan Chuck was here tonight too. So Chris and I talked about this. We know we wanted to get this meeting done, but also knowing that essentially the district closed at midday today. So I just appreciate them returning or hanging around and being a part of this presentation tonight, or this conversation. So I'll just reiterate quickly what Chris said. One of my concerns about coming together after this was twofold. One, making sure that we don't go down a lane where we're talking about safety protocols and all that in a public meeting, because it's just not good practice to do that. And then the other is, even with good intention, I just want to be protective of our high school administration to make sure that tonight is not about sort of why didn't we do this or why didn't we do that. That feedback is welcome, but I would welcome it, offline so that we can then get it to the right person. I will just say that, to echo what Chris said, I was in the building the whole day, and I was completely just overwhelmed in a positive way with how this was handled. When I walked in, the law enforcement was here in full and continued to come in behind me. And it was as calm as you can imagine it would be. Now, students were sheltered in place, granted, so the building was quiet, but the adults were calm. Police knew exactly what needed to happen, and you felt that walking in. There was no chaos, there was no question. They had clearly set up a command structure, and you just felt like you were in good hands. It's important to me, having been a principal, that I let the principal sort of manage a situation, which Lauren did really skillfully, and I sort of just kind of trailed behind her to make sure that what questions we need to talk through together, and told her that I take over the communication piece and then let law enforcement do the parts that they need. I had redirected some central office staff to the high school just so we could have additional adults on scene. Ellen Chuck's office is here, so she was right up to help us, because all those communications that went out, it was Ellen that was helping me push those out quickly. And so the team really came together, and people were just sort of either actively working on something or just waiting quietly. And it as unfortunate as it was, and unsettling as it was, when the day was over, you could really look back and see that it was well managed. Like Chris, I've not received one piece of negative feedback, which is unusual in a normal circumstance, something like this. The way my day ended is I ended up having to do something family related after I left the high school at the end of the day. I got home that night. I said I should go to the middle school concert to show my face. I went to do that. It was packed. And then I stood in the lobby after thinking, they'll give people a chance to come at me here if they want to, say what they want to say. Instead, I got hugs and thank yous and, really positive words of appreciation. And I had a full inbox that I chose not to attack that night because I didn't know if I would be able to handle that. Waited to the next morning, and the comments were not at all negative even. So a few questions, totally appropriate that were answered. But I attribute all that to the folks that were in charge that day. So I'm sure they'll speak to this, but I can say as a superintendent, I felt very well taken care of that day by our first responders. I had kids feeling safe, which is the most important part, staff feeling safe. Lauren had a staff meeting that day, and she had a little ice cream celebration prepared for her staff and made the right decision to actually still do that, but not hold the full staff meeting, just give them a chance to just take a collective deep breath. And I was happy to see, after Lauren did a great job of thanking everybody, somebody yelling out from the crowd, Admin did an awesome job, and then the whole staff stood and gave a standing ovation. So, really positive ending to something that could have been a lot different.
No, I'll just add to that, like Tara and I had children in the building. Normally, everything was happening so quickly, and normally my first call would have been to you, because you're vice chair, but something had me call Tara first, I don't know why, I think maybe because I knew she had a child in the building too. And by 11 o'clock, when I picked up my daughter and dismissed her from school, she came out of the building, and we were walking up to the car to go home, and I said, did you feel safe at all times today during this? And she immediately said yes. And she was not upset about it, and she just immediately said yes, which made me feel really good, so.
Yeah, and we know that there were, kids reacted different ways, so I want to make sure that she had a full complement of support personnel available the next day. Officer, he's not detective right now. Detective Krogan, is he Officer Krogan?
Yeah.
Murph's handler. Murph's partner had all their friends from other departments, and there was close to maybe 8 or 10 couple of dogs there the next day, which was, again, it was like another example of other agencies willing to sort of step up and bring their resources here just to make kids feel taken care of, and adults taken care of. I was here that morning and I had to leave as the other dogs were coming in. I was kind of sad because they were looking all excited to see each other, and I wanted to kind of see the reunion, see they're all friends. But the chief was kind enough to have 2 police officers at the concert that night, just for a feeling of security. One of the officers was actually helping people find seats. They were like, and it was great. It was just all very positive. So I appreciate the extra support that happened after. Hear from them, or
Hear from the police chief and Dr. Becky.
Lauren, you push that button.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me here and us here. I think you both said it great, which is what I would just echo and emphasize. We trained for this, and I think that day it showed. I'm proud of our staff, how they responded. Everything fell into place. It shows that the training works. It's what we planned for. We don't obviously want these things to happen, but it's nice knowing that we're confident and we're ready if and when it does happen. But I'm also equally proud of Lauren, the superintendent, the students, and your staff. It was like Brian, like you said, it was chaotic, but yet there was a sense of calm. I think everybody knew the role they had, and it all fell into place. And it just worked out very well. And I think a couple of things. It emphasizes, I think, the importance of the position of the school resource officer in the school, because it all happened with Officer Costa right out of the gate. Having that resource there, really, I think in this situation, it just really underscores how important that position is. With our regional dispatch, the police side just transferred on to regional dispatch in the past couple of weeks. That was another huge component. They trained for the scenario, and it all fell into place. They immediately called the outside agencies, the neighboring resources, the fire, the EMS. So they were all, even from my perspective, it just all fell into place really quickly, and how it should fall into place. Fire had stage, EMS had stage, and the police were there doing their thing, and command was set up instantly, and that's how these situations are supposed to unfold. One thing too I wanted to emphasize, or just briefly discuss, is how the students handled this situation too, in the staff. Is when I first got there, there was a need to secure sort of the left side of the building, the gymnasium, and up in the library area. So I went with Officer Costa myself, and we handled that. Went upstairs into the library, and it was the back of the library. There's a room, it's a storage room that has a solid door on it. The door was locked, and Officer Costa had a key, and she unlocked the door, and we, pulled the handle down and tried to open the door, and we couldn't. And it became obvious that the door was barricaded, and there were people in there, but we didn't hear a peep out of that room. I didn't think there was anybody in that room, but I later learned, we opened the door, she and Officer Costa announced herself, and Someone pulled open the door and it was students and staff in there, but I later learned it was Melissa DeFonso was in there. And I think there were 15 or 20 people in that. I don't know how big the room is. But we didn't hear a peep out of that room, and that's exactly what they're supposed to do. So again, kudos to you and your staff. Everybody knew what they were doing. They knew their role, and it all fell into place.
Yeah. I can't thank Chief DePercio and Dr. Regan enough for their support and response that day. It was incredible how quickly we had police in the building. And the staff was amazing. The students were amazing. I would say in particular, like the front office staff, just trying to like answer the phones and reassure parents, and just kind of giving as much information as possible. It was quick. I mean, the response was very fast. I'd have to say, like, having Officer Costa in the building was very helpful. I think one of the things that we also acknowledged is like the addition of the walkie-talkies this year. That's something that I felt very strongly about, being the only school in the district that didn't use them. Like, we brought them in over the summer, and I think that those, were very important that day. I can't imagine how we would have managed like the situation just using like text in that. And I'm just really grateful for the community in the, following up on this. I had sent out our newsletter and I received a lot of responses from parents about just how grateful they were, how wonderful the response was, how supported their students felt. And I think for me, it's been clear, like I'm very student focused. So in the moments, like my fear is obviously like the situation, but making sure that the students understand that like we're here to help them and keep them safe to the best of our ability each and every day. And also the parents, I think knowing that like that is what we want to make sure of each and every day. Like you trust us every day when you send your children to school, and I take that as a huge responsibility. And so I think, trying to continually update the students and staff, making sure that they knew what was going on. It's sort of, it gets tricky, like going back and forth on like, you're safe, because you don't want to, but I felt like there was no other, with all of the police presence and the first responders and all the adults and their training and the ability to know what to do in that situation, I did feel like, the students and staff were as safe as we could possibly make them. And it's really great for me to hear, like Mr. Reed saying that his daughter didn't, felt safe the whole time. That is exactly what I want to hear and know. So I just can't, 6 months into my first year as a principal, I didn't expect, to have to deal with something of this magnitude. However, I am unbelievably grateful for the way that families, police officers, students, staff, colleagues handled it. I just can't say enough about that. And I think calmness is very, very important. And so I would agree that even though the situation was unbelievably challenging and difficult, I feel like there was a sense of calmness throughout the building, and I'm glad to hear, what I've heard from staff, they felt that way, and students, so that is really important to me.
At dismissal, it was noteworthy to me coming into the building, procedure that was put into place, how calm and orderly it was. Coming from outside and the panic that was along Brigham Street and Curly Drive. Then you walked into the school to pick up your child and it was completely calm, which it was noteworthy to me.
Thank you.
I was just want to say that, no situation like this is perfect, right? So we, I know that chief had his crew in the conference room after to kind of just talk about the police end of things and do a quick debrief. The timing of this, we didn't want to have a debrief from the school side at the very end of the week, and then we had a short week this week, so we've talked about convening just the high school team, administration. Actually, someone from the Welcome Center, our coordinator from the Welcome Center, said if you have that conversation, I'm going to be part of it, because they were fielding calls there for Portuguese and Spanish-speaking parents, right? So we'll get that group together right after the break, just to have a debrief together to talk about, anything internally that we felt we would want to do differently, or any different protocols we want to put in place. Or, that's unfortunately what happens. You have your protocols, you go through a situation or drill, and you realize something doesn't work, right? So you want to go back and so we will have that happen right after the break. Include officer costs at least in that if there's.
Rick, what about the towns around us? So I was seeing Framingham, Worcester, I think they were showing up with police dogs, but there were a lot of towns. I know there were a couple of main towns, Marlborough being the first, that had officers here. there were so many police cars out there. Like, what were the main towns that sent, and then were there other towns that were just sending canine units?
Yeah.
The state police was there.
Yeah, so the immediate communities, I think it was Berlin, Bolton, and Marlborough, they were dispatched. They were notified by our regional dispatch center. So they sent whatever assets they had available for us. State police monitored, they responded, and then through our command center here, we requested additional resources through the state police, and that's where we requested some explosive and gun detection dogs. So that's through the state police. So they had dogs that came from Worcester and Framingham to help out with that. But immediately the surrounding communities, the ones that are notified through our dispatch center.
What about I never saw it, and I think it's something that was needed, and I think it was very well executed, but I think something that increased panic from the outside was at the Elks. There was somewhere between 10 and 15 ambulances lined up, so as people were coming from across town, I didn't go by it, so I never saw it. I think that increased anxiety, but it was needed and in place in case we had a situation.
It did, and I've heard from some parents about that too, how just exactly what you just said, how it increased the level of fear,
Yeah.
but at the same time was reassuring to them.
Right.
So, and that was part of the whole system of making those proper notifications immediately. So there's no delay in getting whatever resources that we need. They're here. We don't need them, but if we do, we have them and they're close.
And members of the public that would have specific concerns can email the superintendent. You can email the school committee, but it's ultimately going to end up with the superintendent. So it's probably best to just email the superintendent, but you can feel free to copy a school committee member if you want to bring up particular concerns. And, this is something that we'll be meeting on. And I think people focus on a high school, but we have 5 schools, and we need to take a look at every school to make sure the infrastructure is in place. And it is at all the schools, but I think there's a couple things that mechanically can be improved on as far as doors and things like that, internal doors and stuff like that we need to look at to improve on how things are secure.
Yeah, and I was communicating with the other 4 principals because they had staff members who were parents. And so this was starting to sort of disrupt their buildings as well. A piece of feedback we received was like, you have this focus on the high school where there are, is there a lockdown in the other 4 schools? And that's good feedback, because not that I would have locked those buildings down internally, but that could have been a good, again, learn, right? That could have been a good message, or would have been a good message to those principals. Just check your perimeter doors, make sure that, we don't want to upset those schools and get kids unnecessarily, concerned about something going on, but just like our buildings are so secure that I think sometimes we forget that it's a good, this is a good moment just to walk the perimeter and make sure that the building is safe and locked up. Or we're going to suspend outside visitors for the next, foreseeable moments, and then we'll let you know when we can let you back into the building. So those are things to think about in terms of common protocols that we can do when something's happening like this at one of our schools. Let's just make sure we do an exterior lock, which they're locked anyway, but unless it's an emergency, we're not having visitors in.
Like a code of no entry.
Yeah. So
If something's happening at one building, then all other buildings have no entry protocol.
yeah, and so in the new protocols with security, and Gene knows this, like it used to be years ago, like code this, code that, code this. And one of the things that Alice and other similar trainings have taught us is that it's absolutely no good, because nobody remembers, and then you have different codes in different buildings. So, the protocol now is just tell people what to do, give them in plain language, right? Not as a code red, but then you need to, just say you need to shelter in place, or you need to lock your classrooms or whatever, and use plain language. So I've had some, I have some questions every year from folks about Alice trainings and drills, and there are debates that go on about whether you do it at the elementary level or not, and what the potential implications could be for little kids that have to go through this. Because part of the training is, to Chief's point, practice like barricading a door, and they have a little one be a part of that. Not even if they're moving furniture, but just being in a room where we're practicing that can be problematic. But I think what this example showed me is that sadly, adults and children are familiar with basic protocols around this kind of thing. And so without sort of having multiple trainings in a year, everybody knew that by sheltering in place, it means they need to blockade their doors and their shades and do the thing. So
Does blockading the doors come at shelter in place, or does it come at lockdown?
Lockdown.
yeah, I mean, yes, but it's also, as we try and keep the adults in the room, like you can do whatever it is that you feel like you need to do at that moment to keep yourself and your kids safe.
Mm.
No one's going to second guess you because you moved furniture in front of the door and the call of the loudspeaker maybe didn't call for that. You do what you feel is right, I think that's sort of the beauty of the simplicity of the new way we approach this. Not new way, but it's tricky to this. But the tragedy of having Virginia Tech taught us that just cowering in a corner is not always the best thing. So we need to give the adults in charge the ability to make a split-second decision that could save lives. So that's why I keep saying protocols now.
So the week before last, something very similar happened at Milford High School. And that call, which was a similar call, I believe, was traced back to a teen, at least from what I read in the paper, was traced back to a teen in Tennessee who was later arrested. Like, is this call something that can be traced?
Yeah, they're still working on that. Obviously not getting into specifics,
Right.
but they're still working to trace that call. We're working with the State Police Fusion Center on trying to track that information piece down. So
Are these
hopefully
things
something comes
usually
from it.
just random? I don't know why somebody was targeting Milford High School from Tennessee. Is this just random usually, or?
Usually it is. Typically it's just a random call that sometimes they go out to multiple schools at once. I don't think there's any real rhyme or reason, but unfortunately it does happen, and we were picked that day. So, but we'll continue to to track down whatever we can with the number and work with the Fusion Center on that. So hopefully something comes from that.
Does anybody from the committee have any particular questions?
I don't have questions. My baby was in that school and it was the worst day of my life so far. And so I just want to start by saying I am incredibly grateful to everybody, the administration, Lauren, the police department for being there immediately. My brain cannot process how quickly people were there, which in the face of what we were seeing outside that building was somewhat reassuring now retrospectively. And I appreciate kind of the tone for this conversation and balancing security while also making sure that the public feels safe and informed about some of the things that are in the purview of school committee. Christy mentioned a couple of things. I think that I would love for our policy subcommittee to take a look at the emergency plans policy. One of the things that I think we could flag is parents, and I train on Alice and disaster mental health, and I know one of the things that you tell parents is do not come to the school because you will interfere, and I know that, and the first thing I did was leave my office to come to the school, and I would do it again every time, and so I think if we, which I'm sure that we do, but I just wasn't aware of it, if we have a designated meeting place for caregivers to go, people want to know, people want to gather during moments like this and be together. And so if there is a place that we can identify and publicly communicate to people so that we can reinforce that message and we can all be together there waiting for updates, I think that would be really important. I think there are a few other pieces in the plan around communication. You mentioned the other schools already. It just so happens that after I got my daughter settled at home, I got a call from one of the schools that my child was very, very sick and needed to come home. So there might be some times that you just can't say, like, nobody comes into the building. Like, I needed to take that child immediately to a doctor. It was a fun day. But what I think that we do, because we've tried so hard to build a sense of community in Hudson, which is a good thing, we buzz people into the buildings without necessarily knowing all the time who they are. And I think I personally have been guilty of holding the door for the person coming behind me, and I would love for immediately us to just reinforce a message out to the schools and to caregivers that we are going to have to be very vigilant with kind of buzzing into buildings, that somebody needs to identify themselves, not to hold the door for the person behind you, even though it might seem rude, that we're doing this in service of safety and security, because even though the swatting instances might be random, the cases of people coming into schools for violence have a connection to those schools in that community. And so it could be somebody that we recognize or know. And I think that I'm so grateful that we're able to have this conversation now. And I don't consider any of this negative feedback. I consider this lessons learned for ways that we can just increase safety and security moving forward. So really, I think reinforcing that message would be helpful. You mentioned the drills as well, and I know there's a lot of opinions on when to hold drills, and I think that the majority of classes know exactly what to do, but not all of them. And in one classroom that I'm aware of, there was 2 of the students who barricaded and shut the door. And that was like amazing to hear, but I want a substitute, I want a brand new teacher. If the drill isn't happening for the first time until March, veteran teachers have this information, but I would love to flag the drills for that first week of school before people come in, even if it's not for students yet, for staff to be able to direct and lead. We all know in those moments that part of your brain that allows you to like problem solve turns off and you're in action mode in that moment. But I think the more that we practice these things, the more they become muscle memory. It'll just help aid in the security. And just the last thing I say is I appreciate that we potentially will come back to a conversation around infrastructure, and without getting into details that would jeopardize security in any way, the budget is within our purview. We're looking at capital plan right now projects, and I think there are some very small things that we could do to increase the security in our schools, including locking the double set of doors on the inside. Our doors are always locked on the outside. I think, I don't want, I don't want to wait for something to happen, and I don't want to wait a year. I think there are some small things that we could do to really help with communication around these plans, security in the other schools, and additional security here that could be a little bit of a light lift. And again, I will end again with gratitude, but it was, you just get the sense that like your whole world can change in a minute. It's really hard. So I want us to celebrate that it wasn't that and that everybody responded so wonderfully, but it's really vulnerable. So I think we need to think about what we can do.
Rick, is there a meeting place? Like so in 15 years on the school committee, I had never experienced something like this. It was extremely intense. And the first thing I did was I went to the corner of Curly Drive and Brigham Street and stood there for 2.5 hours. Is there a place that we have in place? Like, is there a meeting place? Do we have that in place?
Well, I think we've talked through our early emergency preparedness meetings that we've had, and maybe even, this might even go back sometime longer than that. But in a situation from here at the high school, the Elks was what was mentioned before. So that's an obvious place for people to filter through. But sort of how it is, the message now is we just want to get, if there is a threat in the building and people have an opportunity to leave, we want to get the people out of the building and run. But I agree that is something that we could discuss internally on sort of formalizing that, having a place for students, anybody who is in the building to leave and go to, and the same thing, to your point, for parents to meet. And that would obviously, we'd have to have multiple of those throughout, depending on what school the incident was at.
And the communication that was coming out, like standing there on Brigham Street on the corner of Curly Drive, I'd had the same information that everybody else had. The only additional information I had was the call from Brian, which we didn't know exactly what was going on. So when we got a text as a school committee saying that there was not an active shooter in the building, that information was sent out to the community at large within a minute. It was very immediate. So, everybody knew the same information very quickly. It's not that we didn't have additional information, which I wouldn't expect we would.
May I?
Sure.
So, Chief Percio, Dr. Kopecki, Superintendent Reagan, thank you. You did an amazing job. Leadership, professionalism, everything we could hope for a situation like this to have that support. Excellent. Just thank you. I think I want to echo all of Tara's comments, but I also want to ask us to all make sure we all stay vigilant, because just because it's happened once doesn't mean it couldn't happen again. And I don't want people to fall into a false sense of security. I don't want people to feel like, oh my God, it's going to happen again. But we have to stay vigilant, right? We've got to practice those drills. We've got to do some things to help each school be, as much as we can, secure. So just because it's happened, we can't chalk it up and go, oh, it's done. It's not going to happen again. And so it's really important to leverage all the debriefs and the lessons learned and continue to practice those going forward. So I hope the policy subcommittee can take that into consideration. How frequently are we looking at these things, and then all the other great work that you've already done. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking us through all that. I agree. I think the policy subcommittee is really important that we review what our current policies are. And I think, and I'm really eager as a school committee member to hear what some of the other community members, stakeholders, police department, administration have to say in terms of ways that we can improve, whatever those are. Nothing is too small or too big. And I'm eager to keep those conversations going as well. Marcia, at that point, I think that the only place you can really orient yourself from is to assume that something will happen, just so that you're best preparing yourself. And so in any situation, as well as it can go, we'd be remiss not to learn everything we can and try to optimize all of our processes, and eager to keep this conversation going soon and to be implementing any policies and to hear what everybody has for suggestions, different things that we can do. And a lot of the suggestions you made a moment ago, Tara, I think those were great. So thank you, folks. Looking forward to keeping this going.
Rick, how does it work with the surrounding communities? So with that, like Berlin and Bolton are small communities, and if they're sending people to us. So I'm talking about, like, is there a plan in place for Hudson, Marlborough, Clinton, Maynard, Westboro that have more staff to be able to help out other communities and not, so if we're drawing on Bolton and Berlin, they have a lot less staff than we do already. Do we have a plan in place that the larger communities like support the smaller communities and each other, or do we just pull from whoever can send people? When we need immediate manpower like that day.
Yeah, I mean, typically on a mutual aid situation, the agency is gonna send who they have available. And then, so in that situation that you just mentioned, if Berlin or Bolton had sent people here and they're left depleted and something happened there, then, sort of trickles out, they would notify the further out community to them to support any incident in their community. But we're fortunate to have those agencies, the larger agencies like Marlboro and Sudbury right nearby, that can help us at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
But we rely on our mutual aid partners quite often, because tonight, for example, our shift would be tied up on an incident, and we might need calls might be coming in, and we pull from whatever communities that have help available for us.
Hmm. Anybody else?
If no one else will go, well, this is louder. Really all the same stuff. I mean, I can't express my gratitude enough for the resources we have in our community and the people that we have in our community. And I've been saying that to people in this community even before this incident. I mean, I feel extremely grateful for the police department that we have. I know a lot of people on other departments in surrounding towns, and they speak extremely highly of our department and the staffing that we have. All great suggestions. I'm definitely eager, as well as Zach, to gather data and meet as a committee. Maybe an executive session, if that's what's needed, to discuss, allotments of funding, and whatever we can do as a committee to take the lessons learned and adjust from there. And lastly, Chris, I accept your apology for not calling you, because Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. I may not have answered this.
Well, everybody answered. So I called, everybody that I called answered the first try, which was kind of amazing. It was, I don't know, I got to Zach and I just said, I guess I still had a couple more to go, and I said, can you just call Chris, because I gotta keep going down the line. So.
All good. Like I said, I might not have answered. I saw Chris something. It's too early for that.
Yeah, but
No, but seriously, all joking aside, thank you guys and your team. Can't express enough gratitude.
Thank you. No, we look forward to the dialogue and the conversations, because I think the general consensus here is that there's always things to improve. We can always do things better, and we're no different from that. We always look to how we can improve, and I think having those conversations will debrief collectively and see if there are things that can improve, what we did good, what we can do better. But I think going back to it, I think again, it just underscores, I think Hudson Police, Hudson Public Schools have had just such a tremendous collaborative and community-based relationship going on well over 2 decades now. And I think, in crisis like this, I think is really when you see that play out.
I was struck when I walked in. It was like going back in time, because the first person I saw was now Lieutenant Downey, right? That's his new rank.
Yes.
I wanna make sure I get it right.
Former SRO.
Roger Downey, who was the SRO when I was principal here years ago. And so, not that he wasn't happy to see you, chief, but it's like, but again, like your point about a 20-year plus relationship, like this was an officer who not only has a lot of years of law enforcement, but he has been understood sort of the kind of tone you need to set, knows the building like all your officers do, like there's no question around that. And it just, as I've lived in town a long time, and I know a lot of the police officers that we meet with, just, you felt like you were in good hands. And then there was a bunch of others that we didn't know because they were from other agencies or other departments, but the familiar faces, Seamus Vio was there as well, so a sergeant now who used to be an SRO here. well. So, rolling the officers in and out of that, into that position, and then they leave after a number of years, they have a familiarity with the physical spaces, but also with what it means to be in a school where there are kids and teachers, and how to sort of balance the job they have to do based on their training with sometimes fools like me that come up and ask a question that's completely outlandish, right? So without getting into details, like as we were bringing the kids into the gym, I had a question from one of the officers about sort of the equipment that they were holding at the time, right? Because it's not sort of the typical things that young kids see a police officer with, which is usually a holster. So that officer was very kind to pull me aside to say, in the most professional and polite way, that like, I get it, I hear what you're saying, but here's why we're doing this. And it wasn't just a show of force. This is why we train this way and why we do it. And I was like, gotcha, right? So, but I had the comfort to be able to ask that question because it came from a staff member about how the kids react when they see something like that. And then they were very flexible about how that was shown, right? So if we didn't have those relationships, it wouldn't have been as successful. Like when Lauren came on as a new principal and our other two new principals, one of the things I asked them to do in the summer was you need to meet the chief of police, you need to meet the fire chief, because we don't want the first time that a principal's meeting chief of police or a fire chief is when there's a crisis and they're rolling up to the building and there's no value. And having that comfort level, familiarity. I should mention the fire chief was there the whole time as well. Like the Hudson Fire was here. And he came up to me at the end and said, listen, they were leaving, whatever, you can call if you can later. So it's just, that's a nice thing about this community. It's doesn't really wrap around itself when you need some additional support.
Yeah, the fire department was fantastic. They had a bunch of resources down there, and they took their role, and they were outstanding for us. They helped sort of block some roads out on the perimeter, and obviously there for any medical reasons that we had, they were there for us too. So yeah, they were great.
I'll add on, so thank you to the fire department as well.
Yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the two of you for pulling this meeting together, because it's really important that we got together soon to have this conversation. And so thank you for knowing that we needed to get together and pulling that all together very, very quickly, and allowing this conversation to take place, or enabling this conversation to take place.
Not that we have to pat each other on the back all the time, but I will say back to you that the fact that all 7 members are here tonight speaks to the committee that we have right now. This is a really supportive school committee, one that understands the importance of its role and wants to do that job at the highest level. So I mean, this is a lot. It's, it's the holiday season, very busy. School vacation just started today, and we're 100% present. So in addition to the two of you, of course, being so, as a superintendent, I do appreciate saying, without question in my mind, the school committee is the board in town that has a heck of a lot of responsibilities in terms of time, and put another meeting on your calendar with such short notice is appreciated, recognized on our end as support for the schools. So thank you.
That was something that was noteworthy to me too, as I was making all these calls, like the voices on the other end. I think we work very well as a committee together, the 7 of us. We might not always agree on everything, which is normal. But we work well together, and that doesn't always happen, as we know. And like each call I made, it was a very calm, reassuring voice on the other end. There was no panic.
Did you call and did you write me out your first call to me? Because when you're like,
Erica, you need to call Tara.
I did ask another member to recall you, but you had a child in the building, as did I. You were my first call, so I understood because I was feeling things internally the same that you were. You maybe just voiced them a little more. Zach came and stood next to me on Curly Drive for a while. It was intense, very intense as a parent, and we got through it. So. Yeah, no, I think we have a very good board that works together. And that doesn't always happen.
And I think the response from the parents is noteworthy too, because there was obviously the fear and the panic that was there, but there was also a level of calmness amongst the parents too. And the superintendent and I went out, and I think Chris, you might have been there at that point, to talk to the parents who were there. And I just think, I think a lot of kudos to them too for their approach with this whole thing and their patience, because I know that can be, it was quite a while until we actually cleared the building to start shuffling any students that were leaving out. So I know there was some time there, and I just thank them for the patience that they demonstrated that day.
Yeah, I would echo that. The dismissal was like the next step of
Yeah.
like, how do we manage this, making sure the kids are safe when they're leaving. And I think I said it 100 times, like I appreciate everyone's patience and understanding while we're trying to just figure out how we get the students dismissed. So again, I just appreciated everyone's response and, just
It
seeing.
was very orderly. They were letting 5 cars down at a time, and they were letting 3 walkers down at a time. And I happened to be the 4th walker in line, and they said, wait here. I was doing whatever somebody in law enforcement told me to do, and I just waited. And then they said, now you can go, And it was very orderly.
And cold.
It was cold.
It was cold.
I was shaking walking up to the building, not because of nerves, but because of just sheer cold.
Yeah.
Just breathing.
We had, one of our curriculum directors was helping take names and didn't have a coat on, and his dad actually gave him his coat.
Yeah,
Which,
and he was working to find out who he was. He
Yeah.
just said, here, you can have it, and he left.
amazing.
Yeah.
I'll echo everybody. It's like, thank you for your bravery coming into the building.
Oh.
Like, I can't imagine being a police officer and like, I was like asking people that were on duty, like, are you glad you were on duty or like sad? And they're like, no, we're glad. This is what we trained for. And I'm like, oh. So I appreciate and commend the bravery and like you're just towing over the school and so that's all.
Yeah, I do want to say, one of Lauren's primary goals, she talked about earlier about school safety, like she really put a focus on securing doors, asking adults to only use one point of entry. I mean, the building was really leaky prior to her arrival, and she didn't do this without pushback. There was a lot of trials and tribulations, right? Adults don't like always to be told what to do. But she held firm to it, and at the end, I think the majority of adults were appreciative of it, right? It's a small number that don't do it our way, do it their way. But it felt that, I thought of that immediately when I'm thinking we're having this situation, and thank God, she had really taken that focus. And so I appreciate thinking. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is I did get some questions that day about why not dismiss everyone, and especially when we were trying to do the individual dismissals, because that, not that it was chaotic, but it was a little that's a little crazy because everybody's anxious and they want to get their kids. And we needed to have some level of orderliness to it, and I appreciate the patience. But I deliberately chose not to, only because a couple of things. Like I know that not every child had a place to go that afternoon. I don't want to send them home without knowing they have an adult to go to, right? I know they're high school kids, but they're kids. So this was a very traumatic experience. So it didn't feel right to me to say, okay, everybody, we're all heading out, and then they're on their own. Like, we didn't have very many kids here at the end of the day, but I felt good that we stayed open because those kids that didn't have a way to get home were safe. They got a warm meal. They had adults around them to help debrief if they needed it. And so that's number one. Number two, I think that it's important after things like this that we have a sense of normalcy as much as we can. It seems crazy, but kids need to feel like things are okay. And number three, like these pranks will happen, and I don't like if it was, not somebody 5 states away or whatever. I don't want people to get the sense that this leads to going home early, right? We want to make sure they know that take it seriously in the moment, but school goes on. So it wasn't a heartless sort of decision that back to class, everyone, because it's certainly not the approach that we took. But that was my thinking around that. It created, in some ways, more chaos. Bad word, more confusion or whatever, more work, I guess, to get kids out fashion, but it just felt like.
And just to comment on that, I mean, I think that was the best decision to me as a therapist. Some kids staying in their routine, staying in their community, staying around people for support is exactly what they needed. I gave my daughter the choice. She felt like she wanted to be home, and so I picked her up. But if she had said she wanted to stay, I would have trusted and had her stay. And from a parent perspective, I know it probably didn't feel that way in the moment. The dismissal was so organized, and for anybody who wasn't a part of it, I mean, we were writing down their names, they were getting called, they were signing out, they were coming out, they were meeting us. It was, yes, it took a while, but it was, again, reassuring that it wasn't just kids going out into the world like without their caregivers. And I just wanted to also comment on what you said at the beginning about the work that you did when you came to secure kind of the building. It's also why I bring up just some of these lessons learned, because I think this is a unique moment, unlike probably what you went through trying to institute some changes, where there's just this, I think, shared sense of community connection, like how do we come together and keep our schools safe? And so I want to capitalize on that now. So if there are changes that might be a little bit inconvenient for people, this is the moment that I want to talk about them. So because I think that I would be shocked if anybody pushed back now.
So we wanted to keep this meeting close to an hour. Zach, did you have something?
Yeah, I did want to say one more thing about, it's, everybody knows that these swatting calls have been sort of increasingly happening, and they're pretty normal across the state, the country. And one of the things I want to think about is how we could be educating people in the community, kids in our schools, sort of doing our part. I hope people across the country, across the state, are talking to people in the community, talking to the kids about the legal consequences, the emotional consequences, just the consequences of what this sort of stuff, what a swatting call can consist of. And so I'll be curious just to hear going forward, what some of the different things we might currently be doing in the community, in the schools, to just be educating people on severity of what a swatting call consists of.
Going back to the dismissal piece, just real quick, I know you wanted to wrap this meeting up. That was some of the questions, and I don't want to say concerns that I got from some people at the time, was that, this is going to take forever to get all these 5 vehicles down at a time, 3 walkers, it's going to take forever. But looking back at that now, and at the time, I was like, it's just going to take a while. But you and your staff did phenomenal with that, because it really was orderly. And now after the fact, I've had the same comments about how parents appreciated how organized it was, because that in and of itself can get chaotic, and with parents, wanting to rush and get in contact with their child, that could have been very disorderly at the time too. So I think that all worked out very well. Bless you.
I think we tend to be hypercritical of ourselves, so it
Yeah.
probably felt more chaotic than it did from the outside, because everything had been quieter in the morning because kids were sort of in certain spots, and now all of a sudden there was a lot of movement and a lot of noise and a lot of people, but everyone was patient.
Yeah.
I think it's just more like, it's good to hear that people on the other side felt like it was okay. We didn't have one parent that was upset saying, "Give me my kid now, I can't wait anymore."
Yeah.
Everybody was great. It was really important for us to remember, so we're not super critical of ourselves. But it's something we'll talk about in the debrief about that dismissal procedure, which could look different the next time. But let's hope it doesn't happen again. But that is hard. With 700 kids in a building, 500 to be dismissed over the window of 60 minutes. Like that's a pretty intense process to go through to make sure people are tracked. One of the things I said to Lauren is we had a similar type incident that happened while I was principal here, and we were not as good at writing names down, and we ended up having some parents actually saying, "I didn't dismiss my child and I don't know where they are," right? So they were safe, they had gone either to a friend's house or here or there, and that's what we tried to avoid this time, to say, we don't want people saying, I didn't know that my child was let out and I don't know where they are. But you can't have somebody say that to us, so that's why we tightened it up a little more, and people thankfully were patient.
So our next meeting is January 13th. We have an executive session prior to that meeting at 6 PM. That's something to note in your calendars. There has just been scheduled a custodians negotiations meeting for January 20th at 5:30. And then is there a secretary that wants to join on as well?
Yes, sorry. I don't have the tape in front of me.
Oh, it's,
You have it? It's a
I'm
January.
looking at it.
No, was it February?
What time is it? I'm looking for it.
6 o'clock.
It might be February.
Well, the three on that committee know what it is. The January 20th for custodians was just finalized, so I wanted to bring that up. But just some dates to keep in mind for the future. And if there's no other questions, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Second.
All those in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.